Hi, I'm IBS and I'm going to be showing you how to deploy a Dojo contract to Starknet. So let's get started. First thing we're going to be doing is to set up a Dojo project. So I'm going to be setting a very simple Dojo project using the sudo init command. So the name of this project is Simple Dojo Game. You can name it whatever name you want, but in my case, I would like to name it Simple Dojo Game. So the next thing to do now is to open this particular project that you just created in VS Code or any text editor of your choice. So this is my project already opened in VS Code. So the first step to take is to add. So the first thing to do is to add profile.sepulia in your scrap.toml file. So I have a very short uh, GitHub gist here that summarizes all of the steps you need to take in order to deploy your contract, your Dojo contract, Starknet. This is like an extract from the main Dojo documentation. If you want to see the main Dojo documentation, you can come over to the documentation and check this section that says deploy to mainnet. More details are here, but this is like an extract, and this is what I'm going to be using for the course of this session. So the first thing to do, which is what we've already done, is to add profile.sepulia in scarp.toml. So we've done that already. And the next thing to do is to create a new file named dojo.sepulia.toml. So after creating this file, you should add this particular key, RPC URL, at the end of the file. So let's do that. So after creating Dojo Sepulia.toml, simply copy the contents of Dojo dev.toml and paste it there. But you should delete these other stuffs and leave only the RPC URL. And for the RPC URL, you should replace it with this, because we are going to be deploying to Sepulia. So after replacing it with the Sepulia RPC URL, the next step is to create a .env.sepulia file and add the following into it. So I'm going to be doing just this. So before I replace the actual keys with whatever is supposed to be there, I want you to note something, that when you are deploying this from your end, you should not forget to add .env.sepulia into your git ignore, because you might maybe forget to delete it after deploying to testnet or mainnet, and you end up pushing it to version control like GitHub. So I recommend that the first thing you do after creating .env.sepulia, the first thing you should do is to add it in .gitignore, so you don't mistakenly push it to GitHub or any other version control. So I just save that and close. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is to replace the RPC URL, the account address, and private key. So for RPC URL, since I'm already using the same RPC URL for Sepulia here, I should also use that same RPC URL here. So for private key and account address, I'll be using a Bona wallet. So for this particular wallet, I actually don't have real funds in it. So I'm gonna be using this particular guy. So this is the account address. And as you can see, this is on Sepulia. So before you copy this account address, make sure it's on Sepulia. If not, if you're not on Sepulia, you're gonna get errors. It's not gonna work. So make sure this is on Sepulia. So for account address, I'll copy this. Come over here, paste it. So for the private key, I'm just gonna open the private key here. This is not. This is where my private key is. So if you're using agents, you can easily copy your private key without actually exposing it. But just uh, just as so, I'll be giving you a very quick security tip over here, and I want to let you know that your private key is something that you'd not go to anybody, because anybody have access to your private key uh, directly have access to your phone. So nobody should see your private key. Not even your cats, nor your dog should see your private key, because these things are very sensitive. So the reason why I'm exposing this is because this is a burner account. So immediately I'm done with this video, I'm gonna dispose this account and never use it again. But in your case, you should not use an account with real funds in it. You should also use a burner account that you don't have funds in it, and if except you want to deploy to mainnet. But if you want to do something like this where you know your private key will be exposed, please don't use it for any other purposes. So as you can see, in my case, I'm using the Agent wallet. If you don't have the Agent wallet, you can simply go to the Agent website and download it. And if you already have Bravos, you can also use Bravos as well. Get your private key and your account from Bravos, and make sure your account is funded with ETH. As you can see, in my case, I have 0.002 ETH, but you should make sure that you have at least 0.001 ETH. So let's jump back in. So after updating the content of .env.sequoia, the next thing to do is to create a file named deploy sepolia.sh. So this is like a bash script. So I got this script from the Dojo documentation. So you can actually check the docs and copy it yourself, or you copy it from these GitHub gits that I created. Any way that works for you, but this is basically a bash script that does most of the deployment process for you. So I'm just gonna create this file, a file named deploy.sepolia.sh. So I'm gonna be pasting the content of so the content of this file is pretty much easy to read. The first thing is that it gets the environment variables from .env.sepolia from which you created up here. And the next thing loads those environment variable and do a couple of other stuff like building your project using the Sepolia profile. If you remember, in Scab.com, we created this Sepolia profile here. So that is what is being used to build your project when you use this particular flag here along with the name. So after building, right, uh, deploys your project to Sepolia, and I think this is the last stage. This is where it deploys the project and gives you the contract address. So after having this script, the next thing to do is to make it executable. So in order to do that, just comment, yeah. So the next thing to do, so after pasting this command, what you simply did is made this particular script executable. So the next thing to do is to run this command. So you can actually name this particular script whatever you want, but just by convention, you're supposed to name it with the network you're deploying it to. Like in my case now, I'm deploying this to Sepolia, so I simply named it deploy sepolia.sh. So let me execute it. And so by executing this particular script now, I'm trying to deploy it to Sepolia, but this is not going to go through, and you are going to see why. The reason is because you can't actually use VS Code to complete this process. So as you can see, the terminal exited before it could complete. So one thing I want you to notice: you should not use VS Code's terminal. You should use your machine's terminal. Like in my case now, I'm using a Mac. So in my case now, I'm using a Mac. So I'll be using my Mac's terminal. So what I'm going to do is to simply cd into the project, simple Dojo game, and simply paste the command that I was using earlier on. So I believe this will definitely work because we are no longer in the VS Code terminal. And so if you're on Mac, you should use the Mac terminal. And if you are on Linux, I believe Linux comes with, when you install Linux, it comes with the default terminal. That is what you should use when you install, I think, Ubuntu. So we have an error here. And if you have an error like this, right, what it simply means is that particular project name that you selected has been taken. So what you should simply do is to change. If you go to your scrap.toml, go to Dojo Sepolia.toml and change the seed to maybe something that is unique, something that you alone, uh, but something that is basically unique. So let me call this, simple Dojo game. So I'm gonna go back and okay. So it basically cleared my terminal for me. So what I'm gonna do is to see into the directory once more. And the next thing to do is to run the command, which is source deploy sh. So this normally takes some time, so you should be patient while deploying your contract. Takes about 1 to 3 minutes depending on when you're doing it. So congratulations, our contract has been deployed successfully. So this is our contract address. When you take this contract address, you can actually explore this contract on any of the block explorer. So let me just paste this guy here. Let me just paste the contract address here. So as you can see, this is our contract that was deployed like a minute ago, and you can check out, whatever you want to like explore, whatever you want to check out from the contract over here. So that is it. That is all you need to do to deploy a Dojo contract. But one more thing I want to show you is how to deploy your Dojo contract to Tori, because if you have a front-end client that you want to interact with your game, like I believe most games have front-end clients, so you most likely need an indexer. Right? What I mean by an indexer is when you have like a multiplayer game, for instance, right? An indexer basically syncs the actions carried by each individual player such that one player can see the action performed by the other player. So Dojo provides an indexer for us, which is the Tori indexer. So the last thing we're going to do is to simply deploy this contract that we just deployed. We will be deploying it to the Tori indexer. So in order to deploy to Tori, the first thing to do is to create a file named Tori sepolia.toml. And once again, this name is actually was decided by me, so you can actually name it whatever you want. So let me simply create a file name. So the next thing to do is to set up configs for this file. So this is the config I'm going to set for this file. This particular RPC should match with whatever RPC that is in your Dojo sepolia.toml. So it's basically where you deploy your contract to. So you should make sure the RPCs are matching. So one last thing to do here is to replace this world address with the address that we got from deploying the contract. So as you can see, this is our world address. So we're gonna basically take it and paste it over here. So all good. Now the last thing to do in order to deploy to Sepolia is to, first of all, log into slots. In my case, I already logged into slots, so that's why when I enter this command slots d create, it's gonna create a deployment for me, but I'm just gonna log in again for the sake of demonstration. So if you want to like check out slots, you should go to Dojo documentation. If you don't have slots installed, you can install slots by running this command and followed by this command. So this is part of the Dojo documentation that talks about how you can actually use slots to how you can actually use slots to deploy tutorial. So the first thing to do is to log into slots, which is the authentication part, and this is how you do that. You enter slot auth login. So let me simply copy this. So slot is gonna ask you to log in with your username. If you have an existing username, you can simply enter the username, or if you don't have a username initially, you can simply create one. So I'm gonna create a new username called user0312, and I'll save the passkey in my machine. Okay, that's basically refused to authenticate. So let's try that once again. So let's try that once again. So we're just gonna click on this approve button, and we've successfully logged into slot. And what it means is we simply have access to slot from the terminal. So the next thing to do is to simply run the deployment command, which we can get from here. So in my case, I'm just going to paste, no, shouldn't be slot auth login. It's this particular command here. So a few things I want you to note from this command. The first one is this particular file name, Tori Simple.html. This should actually match with whatever you name your file. So whatever you name your file at this point, Tori Simple.html. So it should actually match. So in case you name your file something else, maybe Tori mainnet.toml, you should use Tori mainnet.toml here. And secondly, this should actually match with the version of Dojo you are using. In our case, now we are using 1.3.0, so I'm just gonna replace that with 1.3.0. And lastly, you should take note of this. This is like your deployment unique ID. So this is what you can use to like access your Tori deployment, and it should be unique. So in case you enter a name and you get an error, you should try to maybe choose another name that is unique and run the deployment once more. So I'm just going to be choosing something I believe is unique. I I so much believe this is a unique uh, deployment name. So I'm gonna click on enter. Okay, I think there is an issue with the tourist circular. I think it should be related to the space. Yeah, I think this should be the problem. So let's try this once more. So I basically cleared my terminal once more. So just gonna so just gonna enter this command once more. So this should deploy our Tori in, yeah. So this basically deploys our Tori, and if you have a front-end client that you will be using to interact with your contract, you definitely need this Tori deployment because all of the index data in your Dojo world, right, can be accessible from here. So that is it. That is how you can deploy your Dojo contracts and also deploy. That's how you can deploy a Dojo contract to Starknet and also create a deployment in Tori. Thank you.